Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Hope you guys been enjoying the content channel as of late, and we are here with my final video regarding 2025. I didn't do a video like this last year, mainly just because I just didn't get around to doing it, but I want to make sure I did it for this year, which is in discussion about my favorites and least favorite films that I had seen from this year. Now, I didn't see as many films this year, just because there were only so much that I was curious to see, and also only so much that I could afford to see, just because financially my situation's been kind of all over the place. Um, but I saw a few movies this year, and there were a few that I would like to discuss in both good ways and in bad ways. So let's get into this. And how I'm going to structure this is that I have five movies that I liked, and then five movies I didn't like. So we're going to go one by one. I'm going to acknowledge a film that I liked, and then acknowledge a film I didn't like, acknowledge a film I liked, a film I didn't like, until we get all the way to my number ones, where were my favorites and my least favorites of the year. So let's get into this. But before we get started, I just wanted to mention a couple of honorable mentions, as well as a couple dishonorable mentions from my list. So starting off with the honorable mentions, wanted to acknowledge films such as Steve, which I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed the atmosphere that was built and the environment there. Cillian Murphy's performance I also thought was pretty good. I also like to acknowledge Elio, which I know a lot of people weren't that crazy about, but I thought it was emotionally satisfying for me. I was really involved with it, even if the story is quite simplistic. I think that emotionally there was quite a bit there for me. Sentimental value, I also enjoyed a bit. I felt as though that it was a little bit stretching in terms of its premise, but I felt that overall, by performance, by overall atmosphere, by the pacing, I just felt that there was a lot there to enjoy as well. Twinless, I enjoyed by its concept. I also enjoyed its performances. I do feel that it does devolve versus evolve, but I think that there is still a lot there to chew on. And, by some structuring, some technical flirtation, I felt that there was some merit to the overall representation of what it's trying to get at about loneliness and, our desire for connection. So I thought it was unique in terms of its approach, but generally by story, it feels like it devolves less than evolves. And then Wallace and Gromit, most Vengeance Most Foul, I just thought was a classic Wallace and Gromit adventure. I am a huge fan of Wallace and Gromit, and I thought that just this how it was told here. I thought it was just a classic, Wallace and Gromit adventure. I thought that I'm always in love with stop motion because just seeing the work that goes into it, and here it's no different. And just a ton of fun, just a ton of fun. And if anyone is an admirer of Wallace and Gromit, this film that they've done is no different, I feel, in terms of just the overall fun that can be had with that series and with those two characters. So and then for my dishonorable mentions, the films that I did not like but did not make my list, we have Happy Gilmore 2, which God, Happy Gilmore. I don't get why people like that film, and I did not care for the sequel either. A Big Bold Beautiful Journey. It was certainly not. It was not. It was big in some regards. I wouldn't say it was bold, and I wouldn't say it was a beautiful journey. Avatar: Fire and Ash, I felt was very long-winded, and I did not feel as though that the point of its journey was completely sound, as much as it just felt like it was just reiterating a lot of things that didn't really amount to much, and also just felt convoluted as time went on. Jurassic World Rebirth is as it is titled. It is just a resupplying of what came before, and not necessarily a reformatting as much as it literally is just a rebirth of what you had seen previously. And Superman, I did not necessarily hate, but I just felt as though that it was mostly that of mediocre and very just formulaic and flat for me, and just and just dishonorable mentions doesn't necessarily, these are not movies that I hate, but as much as I was just not caring for or felt disappointed by. But those are my honorable and dishonorable mentions. So now let's get into my 5 best and my 5 worst from this past year. So starting off with my number 5, when it comes to the my favorites of the year, that is going to go to Train Dreams. I really enjoyed the. I mean, they're visually, just state up front. I mean, um, it is overwhelming. It is overwhelming by how gorgeous the film looks. There are some just beautiful scenery. Just the tinting, the framing. All that in that respect is quite beautiful to look at. And I do think it's overpowering in terms of the narrative itself. If I were when I gave some issues with the film, but generally by the story, by how it is told, by the performances that are there at the center of it, Joel Edgerton I think does a great job here. Um, the story of ultimately that of tragedy, not one of hopefulness. There's it's a bleak story at the end of the day, and I kind of admired the trueness, or the trueness, the staying true to kind of reality itself to some extent, where somebody is so wrapped up in that space, and what happens when you have little room to explore elsewhere, when you become isolated, when you are stuck in a specific mindset. I thought that was interesting. And how they play with time, I feel like in some regards is well informative as well. So generally, I thought it was a good piece, and visually, it's just outstanding by that mark alone. But performance-wise, narratively speaking, there's a lot of satisfaction to be found outside of what it is they're doing aesthetically. So to contrast to that, the my number 5 in terms of films I did not like, that would be going to Dogman. Um, I found this film to be irritating. I think this was my first film of the year, if I'm not mistaken, and I was just annoyed. I was just very, very annoyed by it. I will, acknowledge, similar to Train Dreams, where yeah, visually, I mean, there is some merit to it, but very expressive. But in that's also my problem, is that it is incredibly expressive to the point where it is just too much for me. Too much, just loud noises and absurdities, and really in this regard, I feel very of just, like in cartoons, there is absurdity, and but the inserting of that absurdity feels as though there is a point to it, to generate a certain response. With this, it's only looking for the hope that you will laugh at the nonsensical value that it is presenting, and I just found that extremely annoying, and I just really was not taken by it at all. So, and I think this was my first film of that year, and it definitely started off on an interesting foot, to say the least. So, now for my number 4, when it comes to my positives, I will be giving that to Hamnet. I really enjoyed this film. I really enjoyed it. I was very emotionally involved in it. I thought that just by the progression, by how it laid out itself, I thought it was very emotionally satisfying in that regard. The 2 performances at the center of it, and also the children too, I thought were just great. Usually with child actors, it's like basically rolling the dice. But I thought the kids were just really great in it, as well as Jesse Buckley and Paul Mescal, who both of which Paul Mescal especially, I'm been it's been nice to see him in certain roles. I saw him in the film also this year, The History of Sound, which I thought he was good in. But I'm just saying, like, I am curious to see more of them. Sorry, my cat just going crazy right now. Um, but yeah, very emotionally satisfying, and just by how they choose to tell that story. I mean, there is some point to where you may think that there is distance taking place, um, because of just how they choose to paint the scenario. But by how things are laid out, by how things are overall executed, I think that there is just a great emphasis on emotion that I think really dictates, but also um, keeps you at a certain place with the characters, that does create some kind of informative environment that isn't necessarily speaking out loud about certain details about the characters, about their mindsets or whatever like that. It's a film that's emotionally charged, and if you are with it in that regard, you may find yourself in a very specific place. But if you're not with it, you may find it to be very hollow. But for me anyway, I was wrapped up in it, and I found it to be very, very satisfying, and I found it to be very, very um, just just really to the heart, on this one for me. So, and then in contrast, it's my number four in terms of the worst. This is where I put Snow White. I know a lot of people will probably put this as their as their worst, of the year, just because there's history with this film, which we've discussed plentiful on this channel about. And, that is what it is. And unfortunately for all that, you get something that is very clunky and does not really materialize. Initially, when it first started, I was optimistic about how it would come together. But with the more time went on, I just started noticing more cracks. I started noticing two productions trying to coexist, and I found a lot of awkward bits to it. Gal Gadot's performance I thought was not good. Rachel Ziegler is fine when it comes to singing, but acting wise, it's rather stiff. Um, there's just a lot of awkwardness to the film, and it's a film that does not really translate, as well as it could have been. And there's just it's problematic, and it just becomes more problematic as time goes on, and as more time is sitting with it, you're just finding less. It's very I wouldn't say soul sucking, but it's that feeling of soul sucking, where every passing minute it's like, okay, this starts out okay, and then no, 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 oh god, oh god, oh god, like that kind of feeling, so not particularly great. And I wish it wasn't on here, just because I hate all the backlash that came with it. But got to call a spade, and this was definitely not a good piece. My number three on the positive sides is going to go to The Room Next Door. This film technically came out last year, but I believe it had a wider release this year, so I'll qualify it for this year. Um, I really enjoyed this. I thought this was very, very good. A very interesting portrayal about how people cling to life, and um, how people take to life itself. You have one person here, Tilda Swinton, who is facing a life threatening illness, and it's a film about somebody uh, who is wanting to kill themselves, and then you have someone who is the opposite to that, who is trying to not acknowledge the harshness of not only of her condition, but also just what she is speaking on. Someone who's choosing to live life a very specific way, whereas the other person is fully embracing life for what it is, and choosing to take matters in their own hands. And um, I think it's very fascinating. I think that the portrayal of that idea, I think, is very sound. I think it's translated very well through these two performances here. Tilda Swinton is just always a fascinating performer for me to watch. I think she's very good in most times with what she does. Julianne Moore was also good in what she did here as well. But I really liked um, the isolated nature that the film takes, and really centralizing on its ideas, and really taking on this idea of the meaning of life, and taking it on in some ways an extreme approach, but I think an informative approach also at the same time. So I really enjoyed this a lot. It has its issues as well, which I've addressed in my review, but I do enjoy I do enjoy a lot about it. There is um, some clunkiness in terms of how it's overall put together, but overall, just satisfaction there is fairly good for me when I came out of it. So, and then to the counterpoint to that, my number three on my worst is going to go to a Minecraft movie. Um, yeah, Dogman annoyed me in certain ways. This one annoyed me in a lot of ways. I really, it's really sad to me to see that a film like this has gone off to do what it did. I think it's very telling of the kind of climate that we're in when it comes to what is successful and what isn't. I mean, obviously this has happened before with lots of movies. Films that just are not good films and they end up going off to do business. But in this case anyway, I just I detest the spirit of this film. It's just not something that I like. It's very nonsensical. It's very just um, it hopes that within its non-rhythmic approach, within the idea of like, oh, this is so absurd, and there's no real rhyme or reason with anything, as per the game itself, I think to some extent, it should be fine, because the source material itself is acting like that. But what you get is something that just fundamentally just is flawed and just doesn't work. The CG mixed with the live action, people had their issues with that in the trailer. It was an issue on the big screen. It looked not great at all. I was not caring for these performances at all. I felt that they were just odd. Um, they weren't funny. And it's essentially a Jack Black vehicle. So if you don't like Jack Black, or if you're kind of exhausted by him, for which I'm one of those where I just look at what he does and I think, yeah, you're just a one trick pony. It's going to wane on you, and I felt my patience getting thinner, at some point. Um, so yeah, you are getting a sequel, but I don't know if I will care to watch another one. So yeah, was not great. I was particularly annoyed by this film. Now for my number two, when it comes to the positives, that is going to go to Eddington. I really enjoyed myself with this. I know that this has caused a lot of division amongst people just because a lot of the political environment that it chooses to take on, and the fact that there is very leniency, a large amount of leniency when it comes to its overall depiction of said politics. It's not a left leaning nor right leaning. It kind of is showcasing both, and I love that. I love that a movie like this doesn't choose to side. It's just more or less an examination of those ideologies and allowing them to play. And in film language, like, it reminded me a lot of the film Throne of Blood, Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, where essentially you have someone who rises to power, and the way that they obtain that power has everlasting consequences to it, and the almost as the ending itself kind of reminds me of that very much so about Throne of Blood. And I thought the performances were great. Joaquin Phoenix just does great here, as well as Pedro Pascal. I love the layout of it, very kind of isolative, just taking place in this one town primarily. Um, and it's funny. It's also intense in some regards. So I thought it was pretty good for what it was, and I just found myself really enjoying of its company, and not being led purely by its political ideology. It's a lot more than that, and I think that for a film that, in that regard, that wishes to be about politics, it's very nice to see something that just chooses to just to observe and not necessarily make a comment on certain things. I mean, obviously there's a certain comment that the filmmaker wants to address, but it's more or less in the vein of observational lenses and not in the I have something to say in that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed it for that regard. And if you remind me of a Kurosawa film, you're probably also doing something pretty good there, if you ask me. So, and in contrast to that, we have my number two worst, which is Sketch. This is Angel Studios. This is a one of their films that they put out this year. I really did not like this. I know what they were trying to do with this, trying to be kind of a Spielbergian type of thing, you know, with this emphasis on adventure, but I just found it to be just very flat and very annoying. I found in the polar opposite to what Hamnet had when it came to child actors, all these child stars I felt were just very wooden. Um, I felt her especially was just annoying. Like the most annoying performance this year definitely came from her. I just was very annoyed with her presence. And just by the overall construction of the narrative itself, it's very convoluted and confusing for something that seems incredibly simple, you know, in terms of just what it is about essentially, you know, these drawings that this kid makes comes to life. It's oddly confusing in some regard, and the rules are not completely laid out, and it just feels more interested in doing something visually to some extent and trying to move the narrative in a certain way that doesn't feel as earnest or as understandable and not as emotionally satisfying as much as trying to find ways to get to that emotion that aren't necessarily satisfying or have much rhyme or reason to it. So yeah, it did not work for me. I didn't find it cute. I didn't find it endearing. I just found it really annoying and also just a bit confusing. And my number one favorite of the year, and really nothing beat it this year. Nothing really came close actually. Was actually Friendship. I really enjoyed this film. I thought that the slip between you know, something that was a flat out comedy to something that became kind of disturbing and horrifying to some extent. I really like that slip between. I thought the performances were good. Tim Robinson I thought was just very funny. I guess this is like kind of his wheelhouse. Like this sort of the stuff that he does here is kind of what he does elsewhere. Um, you know, I really enjoyed the way that everything kind of also worked within it, you know, like that again, that slip between that of uh, you know, something that was, you know, innocent and funny to something that then becomes something more dark and something more disturbing, um, and a more real worldly. And I think that it plays well to the idea of the film as well, where it's just this um, you know, the uncertainty or the doubts, you know, within the narrator and the narcissism that is embedded within that as well, um, you know, within that character that Tim Robinson plays. I thought it was just a very interesting and very fun and just a generally just, you know, as I walked out of it, I was just like, that was just a really great time. And it just the overall just making of that film, how it chose to move in those certain states, I thought just worked really well, was really informative, and just straight up funny, and just in some points just really startling. You know, one scene in particular towards the end that I thought was very like, oh wow, shit's getting really real, you know. So I thought it was a very fun piece and a very good piece, and splitting the difference between something that is that of a that of a comedy and to some extent that of a horror film. So, and then my the worst thing that I saw this year, bar none, in my opinion anyway, was Smurfs. Um, you know, I think people will probably put Snow White as their number one just because, you know, it was, you know, the film probably the most talked about this past year. But for my money anyway, I thought Smurfs was just the worst. It was just visually just all over the place. You know, at some points animated, and some points live action, and then there was, you know, just a real lack of story. You know, I really feel like this was a vehicle for just Rihanna and her music. I thought that the first time I saw the trailer, and the film just pretty much just confirmed that, it feels like a movie that didn't want to be made until Rihanna came along, and Rihanna decided to put her stamp all over it. And it comes across as just something for her and for her, whatever album she's working on and music she wants to put up, and less so of whatever it is the Smurfs franchise is, which at this point I feel just no one fundamentally cares. Box office kind of showed that. But yeah, just really all over the place and just did not have really a rhyme or reason for things to happen. A real just lack of of like of care for story, it just feels as though that they're just kind of wrote it out in the first draft and then they're saying, yeah, that's fine. And then they just moved on. Um, they're like, well, we only have Rihanna for so long, so just create a draft and then we'll move on. So yeah, it was not great. It was really not good. It was amusing for me and my brother to watch together, but as a film, it was very problematic. So those are what I would consider the best and the worst of 2025. Yeah, I mean, there were some movies that I didn't get around to seeing, namely films like The Assessment, as well as Warfare, which I was kind of curious about seeing. But, I'll probably get around to those when I can. But as it stands, those are my favorites and my least favorites from this past year. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. You guys let me know your guys' favorites and least favorites from last year. What are your guys' hopes for this year when it comes to movies? Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.